How did the world stumble into the deadliest conflict in human history? In just 6 years, entire cities were reduced to rubble, more than 60 million lives were lost, and 2 new superpowers rose from the ashes. This wasn't just another war. It was a clash that reshaped borders, toppled empires, and unleashed weapons so terrifying they changed humanity forever. But the story of World War II isn't just about armies and leaders. It's about desperation, ambition, betrayal, and survival. To understand how it all began, we have to look at the scars left behind after the first war that was supposed to end all wars. The seeds of war. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, Germany wasn't just defeated, it was humiliated. The Treaty of Versailles forced the nation to pay crushing reparations, surrender territory, and accept full blame for the war. For ordinary Germans, this wasn't peace. It was punishment. The economy collapsed under the weight of debt. People carried wheelbarrows of worthless banknotes just to buy bread, while unemployment soared into the millions. Entire families watched their savings vanish overnight. Desperation spread like wildfire, and with it came anger that would soon be weaponized. Many Germans believed they hadn't lost the war on the battlefield, but had been betrayed from within. That bitterness created the perfect storm for a new kind of leader, one who promised to restore pride, strength, and revenge. And in the shadows, a man named Adolf Hitler was waiting. The rise of dictators. Out of Germany's chaos rose Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party. He promised jobs, order, and revenge for the humiliation of Versailles. Crowds filled stadiums to hear him speak, swept up in fiery rhetoric about restoring German pride. And behind the speeches came something more dangerous. Factories working day and night to rebuild a forbidden army. Germany wasn't alone. In Italy, Benito Mussolini marched his black shirts through Rome and built a fascist state obsessed with conquest. His dreams of empire led to brutal campaigns in Africa, where entire villages were wiped out in the name of civilization. And across the globe, Japan's generals pursued their own vision of domination. Exploiting China's civil war, they seized land, committed atrocities against civilians, and prepared for even larger ambitions in the Pacific. Even Spain became a proving ground. Its civil war drew in Hitler and Mussolini, who used the conflict to test new weapons, new tactics, and their ability to crush opponents without mercy. By the late 1930s, democracy was shrinking. Authoritarian leaders weren't just rising, they were sharpening their blades. First strikes. By the late 1930s, Hitler decided talk wasn't enough. It was time to act. His first move was bold: the annexation of Austria, welcomed by many German-speaking citizens who saw him as a savior. The world watched nervously, but no one stopped him. Next came Czechoslovakia. Hitler promised he only wanted the Sudetenland, a region with ethnic Germans, but soon the entire country fell under Nazi control. Each step was a test, and the Allies kept backing down. Then, in August 1939, came a shocking twist. Hitler struck a secret deal with his sworn ideological enemy, Joseph Stalin. The Nazi-Soviet pact carved up Eastern Europe like a pie, with Poland sitting at the center. On September 1st, 1939, German tanks roared across the Polish border in a lightning assault. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was unlike anything the world had seen. Planes bombed from above, tanks smashed through defenses, and troops poured in with brutal speed. Just 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. World War II had begun. Lightning war across Europe. Germany wasted no time turning Europe into a battlefield. In April 1940, Hitler's forces stormed Denmark and Norway, securing vital iron ore routes. Within weeks, his armies swept into Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Belgium. This was Blitzkrieg in full force: fast-moving tanks, coordinated airstrikes, and relentless infantry. Defenses that had taken years to build crumbled in days. Soldiers and civilians alike were stunned by the speed and brutality of Germany's war machine. By June, German troops were bearing down on Paris. The French army, once considered the strongest in Europe, collapsed under the pressure. In less than 6 weeks, France surrendered. Half the country fell under direct Nazi control, while the other half became a puppet state. But Britain refused to fold. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe unleashed wave after wave of bombers, pounding London and other cities in what became known as the Blitz. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, yet the British spirit held firm. Germany had conquered much of Europe with terrifying ease, but one island nation still stood defiant, and Hitler knew he couldn't move forward without crushing it first. The war widens. Even as German tanks rolled across Western Europe, the map kept shifting. The Soviet Union, bound by its secret pact with Hitler, seized the Baltic states and carved off a slice of Romania. Together, Berlin and Moscow were drawing borders with ruthless precision. But cracks were already forming. Italy, eager to prove itself, launched an invasion of Greece. Instead of a quick victory, Mussolini's troops were pushed back, forcing Hitler to divert his own forces south. In the Balkans, Yugoslavia and Greece were soon crushed, but the distraction delayed Hitler's next, deadlier move. Meanwhile, WWII resistance movements began to take shape. Across occupied Europe, civilians risked everything to sabotage supply lines, spread underground newspapers, and gather intelligence for the Allies. Each act of defiance came at a terrible cost, but the flame of resistance was impossible to extinguish. And then came Hitler's boldest gamble of all. On June 22, 1941, he broke his pact with Stalin and launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. Millions of German troops stormed into the Soviet Union, expecting a swift victory. Instead, they would unleash a war of unimaginable brutality that would reshape the entire conflict. The Pacific explodes. While Hitler's armies tore into the Soviet Union, another storm was building across the Pacific. Japan, already deep in China, pushed further, occupying French Indochina and threatening Western colonies. The United States responded with a crippling embargo on oil and steel, hoping to choke Japan's war machine. But instead of backing down, Japan struck first. On December 7, 1941, waves of Japanese planes roared over Pearl Harbor. In just 2 hours, much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet lay in ruins. America, which had tried to stay out of the war, now had no choice. The next day, the United States declared war. Japan surged forward, capturing Hong Kong, the Philippines, Malaya, and vast stretches of the Pacific. But its victories came with horror. Millions of civilians were forced into labor camps. Allied prisoners were starved, beaten, and worked to death building railways through jungles. Women were enslaved as comfort victims for the Japanese army. The brutality shocked the world, and as Japan expanded, the conflict was no longer just Europe's war. It had truly become a world war, one that now stretched across every ocean and continent. The turning point. For 2 years, the Axis looked unstoppable, but by 1942, cracks began to show. In North Africa, Allied forces clashed with Germany's Africa Corps, led by the legendary Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel. At first, his tactics dazzled the battlefield, but by late 1942, supply lines were cut and Rommel's army was driven back. Then came Stalingrad. What began as another German offensive turned into a brutal siege. Street by street, building by building, Soviet troops refused to yield. Temperatures dropped below freezing, and entire German divisions froze or starved. By February 1943, the once invincible Wehrmacht surrendered. Hitler's aura of invincibility was shattered. Meanwhile, the Allies invaded Sicily and forced Italy out of the war. Mussolini was toppled, and the Italians signed an armistice. Furious, Hitler poured German troops into Italy, but it was a desperate fight against the tide. And on June 6, 1944, came the boldest move of all, D-Day. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, overwhelming Nazi defenses. Within weeks, Paris was liberated, and Germany was now fighting on 2 collapsing fronts. The tide had turned. What once seemed like certain Axis victory was now spiraling toward inevitable defeat. The endgame. By 1945, the Axis powers were collapsing under relentless pressure. In the east, the Red Army pushed through Eastern Europe, city after city falling as Soviet troops stormed toward Berlin. In the west, Allied forces liberated France and crossed into Germany, closing the jaws of defeat. Inside his Berlin bunker, Adolf Hitler watched his empire crumble. Refusing to surrender, he gave delusional orders to armies that no longer existed. On April 30th, 1945, as Soviet forces closed in, Hitler took his own life. Just days later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. But the war wasn't over. In the Pacific, Japan fought on with ferocity, even as American bombers reduced cities to ashes. Then came the weapon no one had seen before. On August 6, 1945, a U.S. bomber dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another struck Nagasaki. Entire cities were obliterated in seconds. The shock was overwhelming. On August 15th, Japan finally surrendered, ending the most destructive war in human history. Conclusion. World War II left the planet scarred in ways no one could have imagined. In just 6 years, more than 60 million people were dead, most of them civilians. Entire cities were leveled, millions displaced, and families shattered forever. Germany and Austria were carved up among the victors, while Europe's once great empires lay in ruins. Out of the devastation, 2 new superpowers emerged, the United States and the Soviet Union, setting the stage for a new kind of conflict, the Cold War. The war gave birth to the United Nations, an institution meant to ensure ensure global peace. But peace itself would prove fragile. Rivalries, suspicion, and new weapons of mass destruction kept the world teetering on the edge of chaos. World War II didn't just change borders, it reshaped humanity's understanding of power, cruelty, and survival. And while it ended in 1945, its shadow still lingers, a reminder of how quickly civilization can fall apart and how high the cost of rebuilding can be. The story of World War II shows us just how fragile peace can be and how far humanity will go in the fight for survival. But this was only the beginning of a new era. The Cold War, nuclear standoffs, and battles fought in the shadows were just around the corner. If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold history brought to life. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a video. What part of World War II shocked you the most? The rise of dictators, the Blitz, or the atomic bomb? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading everyone. Thanks for watching, and remember, history doesn't just tell us where we've been, it warns us about where we could be heading.